to the lineup for this December the 19th, 2024. Yes, it's almost 2025. I'm Barry Stagner, and thank you for joining us. And I know not everybody sticks with it throughout the whole program, so if you don't make it all the way to the end, let me wish you a Merry Christmas right now before we jump in. And we've got quite a program ahead of you, ahead for us, I should say, this evening. So many things happening in our world. And one of the things I think that we'll focus on here in a few moments that you'll find interesting is in the Ezekiel war scenario, there has been kind of a, no, I don't want to say a missing piece, but there's been a part that needed to develop further in order for us to maybe establish a bit of how soon it could possibly happen. And I think that it is definitely on the horizon. After all, there'd be no reason for the coalition of forces described in Ezekiel to come together and have military cooperation together if something wasn't going to happen. And I think the determining factor is the Jews are in possession of Jerusalem. Israel is a nation once again. And all of this set forward the prophetic clock in motion, advancing throughout the course of the last 76 years toward the end of the church age, where God is going to deal directly with the nation of Israel during the tribulation period known as the 70th week of Daniel. Now, I know there are those who always say, well, the church has gone through persecution in the past. Absolutely. The church has always experienced persecution. As a matter of fact, in the 20th century, there were more martyrs in the 20th century than the previous 19 centuries combined. But here's the thing. None of that was the wrath of God. It was all the wrath of man. The tribulation is the wrath of God, and God is not going to pour out his wrath on his church. Hebrews 9 tells us that we don't have an appointment. Hebrews. 1 Thessalonians 5:9 tells us we don't have an appointment with God's wrath. So we should be looking up, expecting the redemption of our bodies and the instantaneous transformation into incorruptible immortality, meeting the dead in Christ in the air and forever to be with the Lord at any moment now. So something exciting to consider during this Christmas season where we recognize the first advent, the first coming of Jesus to the earth. And remember, he's coming again, but he's coming for a purpose apart from sin, apart from dying for the sins of the whole world. He's coming back to take over the world, or I should say take back the world and the rule and reign in righteousness from Jerusalem as he sits on David's throne, which is the throne of human government. Well, with that said, let's jump into our stories here this evening. And we've got some, as I said, some rather interesting things happening on multiple levels. And one of the things I wanted to start with, maybe just a little bit of clarity on some of these drone stories. We've been hearing all kinds of things out there, and let's just address what some of the media outlets are saying about this particular issue. And our first story comes from the Western Journal. Excuse me. And the headline reads, they're in the UK too. Drones buzzing presumed U.S. nuclear base. FBI is known for a year. The little truncated headlines there reads. Now, the sooner Americans hear an honest explanation for the recent wave of drone sightings, the better for everyone. Until then, we will continue to wonder if the U.S. government officials qualify as evil liars or mere incompetence. And the answer to that is yes to both, sadly. Many, I should say, not all. There's still wonderful Christian and godly men and women in places of office in our country and within U.S. government officials and agencies. Now, by the way, let me just throw this in. This drone thing is legit. I mean, they are happening. We had drones next to the church last Friday evening. Our Spanish ministry had their annual Christmas program, and we had, I'm sorry, there was a fuzzy on my sweater, and it kept attracting my attention. And so, anyway, moving on. Sorry about that. But our Spanish ministry had their Christmas program, and one of the guys working security there spotted drones up in the air next to the church. Now, the reason I think this is important is because we are right next to an airport, and it is illegal to fly a drone within 3 miles of the airport. We're like maybe a third of a mile from the airport, so we were certainly within the federal violation guidelines for there to be a drone in that proximity to the airport. So it is happening. And on Tuesday, the UK's Daily Mail reported that last month that high-speed drones began buzzing around a U.S. airbase in eastern England, reportedly the site of a nuclear arsenal. and that federal officials, including the FBI, have known about the border drone threat to U.S. military installations for more than a year. The Daily Mail reported was and featured a fascinating and alarming account of officials' response to drone sightings that began November 20th at RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, England. The account came from a senior UK military officer who received a briefing on the incident. The drones were flying with no lights. When they were close to the site, they were turning on the lights, going, "Here I am," and as far as I know, not one piece of our equipment could bring it down or spot it, the unnamed officer said. A police helicopter investigated the drones and made incredible discoveries. They were traveling really fast, faster than anything they'd seen before. From police helicopter footage, one of the drones was tracked at 170 miles an hour. Well, that tells you this isn't, a Best Buy purchased drone or anywhere else where you could buy a drone. These were, I guess we could use the phrase, military grade. It is very advanced technology. It can move very fast, and it can't be detected on any of the systems that we've currently got. It's too small to pick up on the radar. Incredibly, that includes detection equipment used by special forces, which proved useless. Furthermore, as if the drone encounters in England do not sufficiently sound an alarm, it turns out that federal officials have known and apparently done nothing about drone threats to the U.S. bases for more than a year. Actually, that is not altogether true. They did something. The one thing for which federal officials possessed undisputed talents, they wrote a report. For weeks in December of 2023, drones swarmed Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, per the Daily Mail. And much like the encounters in England, the Langley incident resulted in a near total security failure. Thus, the report called for more training, better communication, more robust notification and reporting system among partner agencies, and perhaps the most telling of all, a better understanding of legal authorities, process, and capabilities of CUAS, anti-drone technology, detection systems. In other words, those who respond to drones seem not to know what to do or how to do it. What, therefore, should Americans make of all this? For one thing, the FBI's involvement hardly inspires confidence. In fact, the Bureau's tyrannical behavior in recent years makes it unlikely that informed Americans will believe anything FBI agents have to say, and that is a sad reality. And Paul talked about what was coming in the last days, and he included within the description of character flaws that will be predominant during the final days of church history, including traitors, those who betray their position and calling, even certainly in government office. And I think, have plenty of reference points to recognize that is long been true, sadly. And I think the article hit the nail on the head. Nobody believes what's coming out of many officials' mouths anymore because they lie just without even hesitation. Now, the Gateway Pundit says, Representative Michael McCall says drones seen flying over U.S. military sites are adversarial, and they're likely coming from communist China. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCall, a Republican from Texas, has raised alarms over unidentified drones observed near U.S. military installations, suggesting they may be adversarial and likely of Chinese origin. The Gateway Pundit previously reported that the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, one of America's most vital military installations, faced an unsettling breach of its airspace over the weekend, reigniting concerns about the security of critical U.S. defense facilities. Mysterious drones buzzed over the Ohio base, forcing the temporary closure of its Class Delta airspace late Friday night and into Saturday morning. And according to base spokesman Bob Pierdeman, the origin of the drones remains unidentified and their intentions are officially deemed not malicious. Well, then what are they doing there? It's a violation of federal law. What a ridiculous statement. I can confirm small aerial systems were spotted over Wright-Patterson between Friday night and Saturday morning, base spokesman Bob Pierdeman told the War Zone on Sunday. And today, leaders have determined that they did not impact base residence facilities or assets. The Air Force is taking all appropriate measures to safeguard our installations and residents. And on Monday, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the FAA, and the Department of Defense released a joint statement detailing their ongoing response on the mysterious drones across the country. The report said as follows: having closely examined the technical data and tips from concerned citizens, We assess that the sightings to date include a combination of lawful commercial drones, hobbyist drones. Just think about what they just said. It's illegal to be that close to a military installation or an airport, and yet they deem them to be lawful commercial drones, hobbyist drones, and law enforcement drones, as well as manned fixed wing aircraft, helicopters, and stars mistakenly reported as drones. We have not identified anything anomalous and do not assess the activity to date to present a national security or public safety risk over civilian airspace in New Jersey or other states in the Northeast. That said, we recognize the concern among many communities. We continue to support state and local authorities with advanced detection technology in support of law enforcement. We urge Congress to enact counter UAS, unmanned aerial vehicles, legislation when it reconvenes that would extend and expand existing counter drone authorities to identify and mitigate any threat that may emerge. Speaking to reporters, McCall emphasized the urgent need to identify the origin of these drones, strongly suggesting that they are adversarial and likely linked to the People's Republic of China. And McCall revealed that NASA is reportedly detecting more of these unidentified aerial systems than even the military. And this discrepancy, he suggested, underscores a concerning lack of awareness within U.S. defense systems. And indeed, we do have that for sure. But one of the things I think that's important to note is that warfare has changed. And now we have all these unmanned vehicles, these bomb dropping drones. And Amir and I were chatting the other day, and he was asking about these drones because drone means something completely different when you live in Israel. And to him, as you've seen these unmanned vehicles that are closer to a small Cessna aircraft in size, and what we have here around the country are those small four-propellered quadrocopters, I guess we could call them, but they are drones. And I was explaining to him, drones even that type of drone can get big enough to carry somebody. And so they can certainly carry a payload. So, but mostly they're for observation, and in this case, probably surveillance. So there is reason for concern. And there have been stories widely reported that there's been a nuclear device that's been snuck into the U.S., and these drones are looking for that nuclear signature that can't be hidden with these drones flying all over the country. And, if you just want to look at the bottom line, something's up. This isn't something that has been going on regularly over the years. I mean, it just made the media this month because everybody's seeing them. They're seen all over the place. So something is going on, and those in places of power have the typical ostrich syndrome, sticking their head in the sand and saying there's nothing to be concerned about. Now, I don't think we have to panic, but listen, there's a reason for this. It's not just everybody. It's not even Christmas yet. If it was the day after Christmas and there was a deluge of drone sightings, well, those are Christmas presents. But we know that's not what it is because Christmas isn't for a week yet. Now, Bloomberg reports, and here's where things get really interesting as far as the Ezekiel war scenario and what I mentioned at the outset. Bloomberg reports that Russian guns, Iranian drones are fueling Sudan's brutal civil war. Sudan has support from Russia and Iran, and these are three nations that are named in the Ezekiel war scenario, and a fourth will come in, and the fifth also later in the story. Sudan has support from Iran and Russia, said Durar, a senior member of Sudan's Beha tribe, who commands a motley crew of pro-army militiamen and sits on a military committee backing the Sudanese army. They provide things like drones and weapons, so the balance of power has changed. The war, fought between two generals jockeying for control of a vast country with a strategic 530-mile Red Sea shoreline, is the bloodiest example of an anti-democratic wave that swept Africa's Sahel region in recent years. Coups from coast to coast have seen military juntas move away from Western allies and closer to Russia, which has deployed mercenaries to Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and the Central African Republic. None have drawn as many external actors as Sudan. And in contrast to the recent humiliation in Syria, Russia and Iran are currently on the winning side. Sudan seems to be an easy win that you can get on the cheap, said Magdi El Ghazouli, a Sudanese academic and a fellow of the Rift Valley Institute. You can get the Red Sea coast. You can get political influence in Khartoum. You can get mineral resources at a very cheap price. You can make a huge profit out of a country like Sudan. As the war drags on, Russia has sold the army millions of barrels of fuel and thousands of weapons and jet components, while Iran has sent shipments of arms and dozens of drones, allowing the military to recapture parts of the capital, Khartoum, and wide swaths of territory across the country from its rival, the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group. Now, the influx of weapons means the war is increasingly being fought in the air. And early on November 21st, the Army used anti-aircraft weapons to shoot down a barrage of RSF drones near the cities of Atbara and Ad-Damar, according to the UN security assessment seen by Bloomberg. Both Russia and Iran have held talks in recent months with the army to build military bases in Port Sudan, according to two Sudanese intelligence officials and 4 Western officials. Those discussions have gained significance as Russia risks having its main ambush to Africa served by potential loss of 2 bases in Syria after the ouster of Bashar al-Assad, and as Iran finds itself weakened by Israel's sustained attacks on its proxy force, Hezbollah, in Lebanon. Now, here's another interesting element. Meanwhile, the UAE has acted as the main supporter of the RSF, according to the U.S. and UN investigators. Now, remember, the UAE is part of the Sheba and Dedan protesting group that will ask the invading nations, what's the point of your invasion of Israel? And here they are on the opposing side of Russia and Iran. The Chinese government hasn't picked a side. The article says Chinese-made drones have been used by both parties, and Beijing has built a $140 million harbor in Port Sudan that ships camels eastward and is in talks with the army to invest in a new oil refinery. Now, the military wing of the port has expanded, and satellite imagery shows construction of new hangars and a tarmac in 2024. And the most important ambassadors today in Port Sudan are Russia, Turkey, the Egyptian, and the Iranian, said El Ghazouli of the Rift Valley Institute. Nobody in Sudan can fight without external support. It's just not possible. You don't make enough weapons in Sudan. You don't make enough ammunition. You don't generate enough fuels. Now, Russia has also provided intelligence support to the group, and the story goes on, talking about Russia's involvement. Now, we just mentioned Turkey, Iran, Russia, and Sudan, obviously. These are 4 of the 5 nations that are named in the Ezekiel war scenario, and we see their partnership deepening. And that's why I think this is worthy of mention, because really, we've seen on the northern border of Israel, in the country of Syria, a military presence of 3 of the 5 named nations. And now we see the involvement of Sudan and the relationship deepening between the other players, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Now, there's one missing piece, and our next story comes from the ISW. It's the Institute for the Study of War. Now, the headline reads, it's kind of lengthy, Africa File, December 12, 2024, Kremlin pivots to Libya or Sudan post-Syria. Turkey mediates Ethiopia, Somalia deal. Now, this is a very, very lengthy article. We won't read it all, but there's the last of the 5 nations, Libya. And you've got, within this headline, you've got all but Iran mentioned. And Russia is preparing to move some assets out of Syria, the article says, although actually it's not an article, this is a research report. Russia is preparing to move assets out of Syria, although Russia has not made any moves that signal that a complete withdrawal from Syria is imminent. The Russian Baltic Fleet's Alexander Shabalin Project 775 landing ship exited the Baltic Sea maritime zone on December 10th, and the Institute for the Study of War assesses that this ship may relocate some Russian military assets from Tartus, and satellite imagery taken on December 9 and 10 shows that all the Russian ships and submarines have left the port of Tartus. That's in Syria. Ukraine's main military intelligence directorate reported on December 10th that Russian forces are still disassembling and removing troops, weapons, and equipment from the Himamine Air Base and An 124 and Il-76 military transport are dismantling equipment at Tartus under the supervision of Russian Spetsnaz. The reported breakdown at the Himamine Air Base follows earlier reports on December 6th that the Russian military redeployed some of its air defense assets previously positioned at the base. Now, Russia, the report goes on to say, will likely turn to Libya to mitigate its reliance on or replace its Syrian bases for its military logistics and objectives to project power into the Mediterranean. Libya is crucially the only country with a Russian military presence in Africa that Russian cargo planes can directly reach from Russia without refueling. Heavier cargo planes can reach Libya only by flying over Turkish airspace, and this range will increase the political leverage that Turkey will hold over Russia or the practical cost of supporting Russian operations in Africa if more cargo planes stop to refuel at other airfields. And the Kremlin had already increased Libya's role as an operational hub for its various Africa Corps deployments in Sub-Saharan Africa throughout 2024. Russia sent 1,000 soldiers, 6,000 tons of equipment to Libya via Syria in March and April of 2024, and Africa Corps then deployed some of these soldiers and equipment to Sub-Saharan countries. So there you have it. All 5 nations in military cooperation together. And up to this point in time, Libya and Sudan have been kind of an also run, at least in the media. They really weren't associated with the activities of Russia, Iran, and Turkey. But now here we have this deepening relationship, which tells us we are late in church history, and there is a change that is going to come on the world scene as these nations have a hook put in their jaw and be drawn down out of the north, invade Israel, something that God himself is going to respond to. And let me just mention what I said, I think, last week, and I've mentioned it a few times on different interviews I've done of late. And that is the possible, and please let me underscore that, the possible chronology of events, I believe, could be the destruction of Damascus. And this would be a catalyst to the Ezekiel invasion. I believe the church age could include the destruction of Damascus and could include the beginning of the Ezekiel war. And then very possibly, again, I want to pause and underscore, and I'm not saying this is thus says the Lord or anything like that, but these are possible and a little bit of a calculated speculation involved here, admittedly. The destruction of Damascus, followed by the start of the Ezekiel war, could therefore then be followed by the rapture of the church. After the rapture of the church, which I believe the church has to be gone before the end of the Ezekiel war. And the reason I say that is because if you read what happens at the end of the Ezekiel war scenario, it is God who directly destroys these nations and their invading forces. And, the King James Version actually gives a percentage that only 1/6 of the invading forces are going to survive. The other 5/6 are going to lie dead on the mountains of Israel, taking 7 months to bury the dead, and the other things we know associated with that scenario. But we are watching these things happen that are, again, just completely unprecedented in the course of history. And this alliance, now written about over 2,500 years ago, has now come to fruition, and we're watching it move closer and closer together in cooperation on all levels. And certainly the hour is late. Now, let me just say this. I believe that it's possible that the end of the Ezekiel war precedes the beginning of the tribulation. I believe the church has to be taken out of the way because God is going to deal directly with the nation of Israel. And, if God was going to act the way Ezekiel 39 describes how he's going to act on behalf of Israel, I would think that would have taken place with the Nazis who were killing Jews indiscriminately. But it didn't, because we're in the church age. So that's why I think the earthquake, the flooding rain, and the hail, and all the other things that happened during that time, the church has to be gone in order for that to happen. So Could be the destruction of Damascus, followed by the beginning of the Ezekiel war, followed by the rapture of the church, followed by the end of the Ezekiel war, followed by the beginning of the tribulation period. After all, if you think about it, if God destroys radical Islam, who's going to protest? Which, predominantly you've got radical Islam represented in 4 of the 5 nations there in the Ezekiel war scenario. And if God destroys radical Islam, who's going to protest the building of a temple? If they've just seen God, wipe out their armies and much of their homelands, then I think people are going to be pretty ready to agree that the Jews ought to be able to build their temple. Now, here's another interesting story which points to the fact that we live in an age of just selfishness and hatefulness and the lawlessness and anything else you can describe, used to describe the character flaws of man. Ynet News asked the question, did Assad trade military secrets with Israel? Turkish claims make global headlines. Syrian President Bashar Assad, ousted by rebel forces on December 8th, reportedly shared classified military information with Israel before fleeing the country, a Turkish newspaper Hürriyet reported on Wednesday. The report, later echoed by global outlets, including Britain's Daily Mail, claims Assad handed over documents detailing the locations of weapons stockpiles, missile launchers, and military hangars. And the Hürriyet report claims that Assad received guarantees from Israel to ensure the safety of his escape route in exchange for the intelligence. Judging by the precision of Israel's strikes on Syrian military assets following Assad's fall, it seems Israel received highly accurate information, the report noted. Turkish commander Abdul Kadir Selvi provided additional details, claiming Assad fled Damascus for Moscow on the morning of December 8th. And Selvi reported that as opposition forces closed in on Damascus on December 7th, a summit took place in Doha involving Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. And Selby quoted Fidan describing the situation obliquely. We met with the Russians and the Iranians in Doha and discussed a few topics. I prefer not to say more. And according to Selby, Assad's escape was coordinated from Russia, which arranged his evacuation from the Russian-operated Khmeimim Air Base to Moscow. Selby also claimed Assad had initially sought refuge in Iran, which refused him, and the negotiations with the UAE failed, leaving Russia as his only option. Selby said a trusted source revealed that Assad provided Israel with detailed maps of Syrian military assets, guaranteeing Israel would not target his escape. Now, looking at the precision strikes conducted by Israel following the departure bolsters credibility of this account, Selby wrote. So here you've got a guy that has killed just incredible amounts of people, 13-year-long civil war in his own country. We'll talk about some of the heinous things that he has done in our next story. But what's he do? He sells out his own country to protect his own hide. This is the type of thing that we have in many places of power around the world. And sadly, you've got the same kind of thing going on right here in the good old U.S. of A. The people will do illegal things to try and make sure that their candidate wins an election or take another candidate out and all these things. And so 2 Timothy 3 is in full play and view right now as people have become headstrong, haughty, and lovers of self and haters of God. Let me just pause and say Jesus is coming soon, I believe. Now, our next story gives us a little bit of a glimpse into how wicked this man is, even as we understand that he betrayed his own people, selling out. People were killed when these military outlets and weapons caches were bombed. But he obviously doesn't care about that. Reuters reports that at least 100,000 bodies in a Syrian mass grave have now been found. The head of a U.S.-based Syrian advocacy organization on Monday said that a mass grave outside Damascus contained the bodies of at least 100,000 people killed by the former government of ousted President Bashar al-Assad. Muaz Mustafa, speaking to Reuters in a telephone interview from Damascus, said the site at Qatafa, 25 miles north of the Syrian capital, was one of 5 mass graves he had identified over the years. 100,000 is the most conservative estimate of the number of bodies buried at the site, said Mustafa, head of the Syrian Emergency Task Force. It's very, very, extremely, almost unfairly conservative estimate. Mustafa said he is sure there are more mass graves than the 5 sites that, along with the Syrian victims, included U.S., British citizens and other foreigners. Hundreds of thousands of Syrians are estimated to have been killed since 2011, when Assad's crackdown on protests against his rule grew into a full-scale civil war. Assad and his father Hafez, who preceded him as president and died in 2000, are accused by Syrians' rights groups and other governments of widespread extrajudicial killings, including mass executions within the country's notorious prison system. Assad repeatedly denied that his government committed human rights violations and painted his detractors as extremists. And Syrian's UN ambassador Qusay al-Dahak did not immediately respond to a request for comment. He assumed the role in January while Assad was still in power, but told reporters last week that he was awaiting instructions from the new authorities and would keep defending and working for the Syrian people. 100,000 people in a mass grave. And I didn't cover it this evening, but there's another story that talks about what they've discovered in some of the morgues around the country, which the bodies that are stored there and yet to be put into a mass grave show very, very clear signs of being tortured. What a wicked, wicked man. And, I have to say, obviously we've seen lots of different angles coming out of Russia and Vladimir Putin. But, when you start defending people like this, that's pretty much the final tell on what's in your heart. And of course, the Russian-U.S. Adversarial relationship is long and widely known. But, the Romans 1 ends with those who approve of the practice of evil and basically predicts their demise in the lake of fire. So just a sad, sad season of human history. And, it might be worth mentioning that war historians tell us, that since men were on the face of the earth, since there were organized countries throughout the history of the world, throughout all recorded history, a grand total of 200 years, there have been peace. In other words, there's been wars every year except for 200 years, and they're not contiguous. They're not chronological. They're scattered. There's been a total of 200 years where there wasn't a war going on in the world. And now here we live in a season of wars and rumors of wars. Now, the Jewish News Syndicate reports Iran's nuclear program alarms world powers. No civilian justifications, say the UK, France, and Germany, and they warn that Tehran must reverse its nuclear escalation. The United Kingdom, France, and Germany on Tuesday called on Iran to reverse its nuclear escalation, claiming there is no credible civilian justification for the amount of highly enriched uranium at its stockpiling, according to the Associated French Press. According to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Tehran has already become the only non-nuclear state to have uranium enriched to 60%, just a short step from military-grade level. In a joint statement ahead of a UN Security Council meeting, the 3 countries warned that Iran's stockpile of high-enriched uranium has reached unprecedented levels, again, without any credible civilian justification. It gives Iran the capability to rapidly produce sufficient fissile material for multiple nuclear weapons. The trio added, Iran has ramped up its installation of advanced centrifuges, which is yet another damaging step in Iran's effort to undermine the nuclear deal that they claim to support. London, Paris, and Berlin on December 6th informed the Security Council of their willingness to reimpose snapback sanctions on Iran over its illicit nuclear program. Iran must de-escalate its nuclear program to create their political environment conducive to meaningful progress and a negotiated solution. Now, the agency announced that the Iranian production capacity is increasing dramatically. Of the 60% inventory, said Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, and the Islamic Republic already has enough 60% enriched uranium for 4 nuclear weapons in principle, should Tehran decide to enrich it further to the 90% level needed, according to Reuters. Now, because this is an area of interest for me, doing a little bit of homework on this issue, when you're going to use, as Iran has often reported, that it's strictly for energy purposes, that they're enriching uranium, the concentration, you've got 2 different isotopes, U-238 and U-235, and the centrifuge's purpose is to spin these isotopes, and the heavier goes to the outside, the center is sucked out, and you've got a higher concentration of the U-235, which is the fissile material, and the more plentiful is the U-238. So there's quite a sequence of centrifuges necessary, and the process has to be repeated over and over and over until you get a 90% concentration of U-235, which is the weapons grade. But if you're wanting to accumulate enough 235 to create energy, the concentration of U-235 in the mix, so to speak, has to be 3 to 5%. So anytime you go over 3 to 5%, then you have other aspirations. You're wasting money for one, and you've got other intentions also. Now, here's the other thing. Because of the 60% number that keeps being mentioned, it's been mentioned for several years. One of the things to take note of is that I found in my personal research on this issue is that all the hard work is done just to get to 20%. And as those who, I was reading this, some of the scientific information on this, and as they described it, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to go from 20% to 90%, because the heavier concentration gets down to a point where, you're having a quicker jump in the percentage of U-235 versus U-238 every time the center of the centrifuge is sucked out and put into another, which again scatters the U-238, the heavier material, to the outside. So once again, as this article said that I was reading, 20% is where all the legwork is done, and getting past that and, pausing at 60%. If it's a hop, skip, and a jump from 20%, then it's just a blink of an eye to get from 60 to 90. So they can have, in a matter of months, they can have fissile material enough for 4 nuclear weapons, as Reuters reported. Now, what we do know is that Israel is not going to be nuked, but we also know that Israel is going to prevail. I should say the God of Israel is going to prevail over the Russians, the Iranians, the Turks, the Sudanese, and the Libyans in this Ezekiel war scenario. They're the ones that are going to pay the price in this whole process. Now, we've talked about the fact that there will be lawlessness abounding in the last days, traitors, and all the other things that we see happening in our world. We learned a lot about people in governmental power during the whole COVID thing, and California obviously is leading the way. And, the governor here has claimed that California is going to be Trump-proof. In other words, it's not going to bow to any of the things that Trump wants to reverse or instate here in our country. And the interesting thing about this is people are fleeing California in record numbers. And this guy, and I'm sorry, I just got to say it, this clown has no idea what reality is. He's living in a fantasy land because he wants to be a person of power. And many have said, and to me, I can't, this tells you something about those in the positions of leadership in the Democratic Party. They see him as the next potential presidential candidate in 2028. This guy who has destroyed one of the most beautiful states in our country and has turned Los Angeles and San Francisco into cesspools. I mean, San Francisco's so bad, they had to make a law against humans defecating, going potty on the sidewalk. I mean, that's what they've done to San Francisco, Newsom's home territory. And, watching what has happened with the COVID deal and all the shutdowns and shutting down schools and all the control that was exhibited by the government. Listen to this story, and this comes from the Post Millennial. California Governor Gavin Newsom declares state of emergency over the bird flu after, get this, 34 cases. Now, why? Why would he do this after 34 cases? It's not like the COVID thing when there were tens of thousands and then eventually millions of cases. In the proclamation, Newsom wrote that, quote, all residents are to obey the direction of emergency officials with regard to this emergency in order to protect their safety, end quote. In other words, everybody has to bow to Newsom. Sounds like somebody that's going to come up during the tribulation. You bow or die. On Wednesday, California Governor Gavin Newsom declared a state of emergency over the bird flu. In the proclamation, Newsom wrote what we just read, and this is again in order to protect their safety. And the proclamation stated that avian influenza, an H5N1, was first detected in the U.S. wild bird population in South Carolina in January 2022, and that an outbreak of the bird flu was first reported in dairy cows in March of 2024. The first case recorded in California in a dairy cow was on August 30th, 2024. Since then, 61 dairies have confirmed positive tests for bird flu across 9 counties in Central California. And despite testing and containment efforts, dairy cows at 4 Southern California dairies tested positive for bird flu on December 12th of 2024, necessitating a shift from regional containment to statewide monitoring and response to active cases. The document noted that since March, there have been 61 human cases reported across 8 states, 34 of them in California. The document stated that there are currently 985 dairies currently under surveillance, testing across the state by the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and 614 dairies are under quarantine. Under the emergency declaration, state agencies shall enter into contracts to arrange for the procurement of materials, goods, and services necessary to quickly assist with the response to and recovery from the impacts of this emergency as needed to assist local governments and for the protection of public health and the environment. You got to buy from the state what's necessary to control this. And, California's been in financial trouble simply because, this big push, as Newsom, was pushing toward some ridiculous date, 2032 or 2035. I can't remember. He said so many dumb things over the years that we're going to be not be able to sell brand new gas-powered cars. It's not that you got to turn your gas-powered car in, but all new car sales have to be electronic vehicles. Now, here's the thing. Throughout California in the summer, when a heat wave hits, they tell people not to run their air conditioner during the day and just only run it at night and do your laundry at night and the other things when the load is lower on the system, the electrical system, because companies aren't operating in the evening, the majority of them, I should say. We can't even keep the air conditioner on during the day, and yet this guy wants to make all the vehicles electric. So again, just the delusions of grandeur that this guy has in his mind. And it just blows my mind that anybody, after seeing what has happened in California, would say, let's take that nationwide and have this guy be our next president. The declaration states that work hour limitations for retired annuitants, permanent and intermittent personnel, and state management and senior supervisors are suspended. Now, watching all this, I think the key is that you have to bow to the government and do what we say. And, we'll tell you when you can work and when you can't work. And when we shut things down, you have to shut down. And when we say this is what you need to do to combat the spread of this H5N1 avian bird flu, then you have to buy it from us. Again, because he pushed for the I'm sorry, I forgot where I was going with that. Because he's been pushing for the electronic vehicles, and there are so many here in California, that 70+ cent gas tax that's on every gallon of gas put a hole in the coffers of the bank account for the state because so many people are driving electric vehicles now, and so they lost a lot of revenue. So he's trying to figure out a way to get it back, I assume. Oh, Lord, come quickly. Now, here's another just, almost unbelievable story. And it makes a point of a lot of people's concerns. And when people say things along the lines of this particular story, they're called bigoted haters and transphobic and all that other stuff. And, not afraid of trans people. There's no reason to be. But I think we have to look at reality. And there was actually a man who's under investigation in Iceland for, he's under investigation from the government from saying that men can't breastfeed babies. And, and he's looked at like he's the nut. And then the people investigating him are actually the ones under the category. Now, again, the post-millennial says a trans killer complains after being removed from the Washington State Women's Prison following having sex with an inmate. Now, this is a man who says he's a woman, and he's having sex with another inmate in the women's prison. And on Tuesday, a trans-identifying murderer serving a life sentence in Washington filed a court petition through the American Civil Liberties Union of Washington, arguing that a transfer to a men's prison is cruel punishment. This comes after being labeled a safety concern at a women's facility and being found having sex with a female inmate. The inmate has claimed to have been denied humanity. In March, 35-year-old Amber Faye Fox Kim, a trans-identifying male who previously went by Brian Kim, was removed from the Washington Corrections Center for Women and transferred back to a men's prison after Kim was caught having sex with a 25-year-old female inmate and other safety concerns. A correction officer found him laying on the floor, completely nude from the waist down, with the cellmate on top of him, also nude, and they were having sex. Engaging in a sex act with another person within a facility is against the facility's rules, except in an approved extended family visit. Kim then went on a hunger strike to protest. He wants to stay in the women's prison. And, the ACLU taking this case is just an insult to legitimate concerns of the violation of law. According to the Seattle Times, Kim has been in solitary for approximately 6 months, excluding a short transfer for gender-affirming surgery and elective surgery that was paid for by Washington taxpayers. Claiming to fear harassment from male inmates, Kim told the outlet from prison, "We're being denied our humanity in a systemic way. Being in isolation like this is soul-sucking." In 2008, Kim was convicted on 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison for murdering Richard and Terry Kim, his parents, in their home in 2006. Following the gruesome murders, Kim attempted to clean the crime scene and conceal the parents' bodies, and the following day went shopping and used his father's debit card to withdraw $1,000. He was initially housed at a men's facility, but was transferred to a women's facility in February 2021 under the State Department of Corrections gender inclusion policy. This policy was approved by Washington's Democrat Governor Jay Inslee in 2020 and allows male convicts to be admitted to the female facility if an administrative panel accepts their gender dysphoria diagnosis. The world has lost its mind. And people, you would think that somebody who sits, on a parole board or is a warden of a prison or somehow involved in the administration of the prison system would be smart enough to see a con man when they encounter one. And yet here they transferred him. And what's he do? He does what a man would do in that situation. I should say many men would do in that situation. He proves that he's not a woman at all. He is a man. But, if somebody hears me say that, I'll probably get in trouble for that. But Israel's 365 News gives us our last story. And the headline reads unprecedented. And we're seeing many things that could be preceded by that title, unprecedented. And this one says the Pope is to open 5 sacred portals on Christmas in a manner described by the Talmud. The Vatican announced that the Pope will open 5 sacred portals on Christmas Eve. Now, we all know the story of sacred portals from the Bible. No, there's no such thing. I mean, this is just bizarre. The ceremony will be the first time this is done, and it's set to coincide with the 2025 Jubilee year. Jubilees have been celebrated every 25 years since the Vatican adopted the tradition in 1300. This year's theme is Pilgrims of Hope. The ceremony, that dubbed Doorway to Salvation by the Vatican, involves the opening of 5 holy doors at ancient basilicas. The doors are located at the basilicas of St. Peter's, St. John Lateran, St. Mary Major, St. Paul outside the walls, all within a 30-minute drive of the Vatican. Excuse me. The ceremony began on December 2nd at the door of St. Peter's Basilica. Prayers were held at the site, and a metal box containing a key was removed from a metal box. Here's a redundant statement. The door at St. Peter's was sealed shut by a wall of bricks, but on December 2nd, they were ripped down to ready the door as part of the rite of recognition. A second portal, a symbolic door at the Libya prison in Rome, will be opened by the Pontiff on December 26th for the Feast of St. Stephen. On December 29th, the Holy Door of the Basilica, St. John Lateran, will be opened. Pope Francis is the bishop of the Basilica. On New Year's Day, the Solemnity of Mary, Pope Francis will open the Holy Door at the Papal Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome. And the final sacred portal will be opened on January 5th at the Papal Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls. And the holy doors will be sealed with bricks once again on January 6th to await the next Jubilee year. Now, I propose that this Jubilee year, governments will undertake initiatives aimed at restoring hope, the Pope said. Forms of amnesty or to pardon meant to help individuals regain confidence in themselves and in society, and programs of reintegration in the community, Francis said in his statement. The ceremony has no source in the Bible or Christian theology, but may be a reference to a verse in the New Testament in John 10:9. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved. And again, this is from Israel 365 News, quoting this passage in the New Testament. Pope Boniface VIII was the first to Christianize the ceremony in 1300 of the Common Era, or BC, as we say, and later proclaimed to be held every 100 years. But 2 years later, the Jubilee was changed every 50 years. And it was not until 125 years after the first celebration that the first holy door was opened in the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, the oldest public church in Rome, which was built in 324 AD. I don't know why this says CE, the Common Era. There were no churches before Christ. The ceremony is highly reminiscent of a section of the Talmud, Sanhedrin 98a, dealing with signs of the Messiah is imminent. Now listen to this. Rabbi Yossi ben Kizma's students asked him, when will the Son of David come? The rabbi replied, I'm hesitant to answer you lest you request from me a sign to corroborate my statement. They said to him, we are not asking you for a sign. So Rabbi Kizma said to them, you will see this existing gate when this existing gate of Rome falls and will be rebuilt, and will fall a second time and will be rebuilt, and will fall a third time, and they will manage to rebuild it until the Son of David comes. So again, the association, with the Messiah and the Pope's involvement, all these other things, the door of salvation being represented in this practice. It's just crazy that we live in a world that is so ready for the man of sin to come and take over. Everything on all running on all cylinders, so to speak. All the spokes on a wheel are in place. And I have to say again, and I make no apology for this. People often comment, you shouldn't say Jesus is coming soon. Well, why not? It's a lot sooner than it was yesterday, or 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago. He's coming a lot sooner than they could have said back then. And besides the fact we're making that statement with Israel approaching the age of a generation, we don't know what that is. Could be 80 years, could be 90 years, could be 100 years, could simply mean that the generation will not pass away until everything takes place. That could just mean everybody alive on May 14th, 1948 is not going to die until everything happens that's recorded in the Olivet Discourse. So either way, I make no apology for saying Jesus is coming soon, because I believe he is. After all, everything is happening that he said we were to look for when he is coming again. And I believe he's coming to get us, and we'll meet him in the air. And then the second coming will happen 7 years later, or ish. I think there's probably some time between the rapture and the beginning of the tribulation, as we mentioned earlier. And then we will return with him at the second coming when his feet touch down on the Mount of Olives. And a large, some estimate 35-mile wide valley is going to open up with rivers of living water flowing to portions of the earth, and the restoring I like to call it an Eden-like condition to the world. And we see, the child leading the wolf and the lamb, and all the other things we see described by Isaiah are going to take place. We are living in a day where I think we should be expecting the rapture at any moment. And that's, I think, probably the best way to end our time. Well, thank you again for joining us. And please, if you would, share this, if you wouldn't mind. And let's get the word out of the lateness of the hour and the prophetic developments that are happening right before our eyes, written millennia in some cases ago. Well, in all cases, really, written because we don't have any new books of the Bible. The Word of God is sealed, so to speak. And therefore, watching these things happen tell us our redemption is nigh. Jesus is coming soon. Well, with that said, let's remember he came the first time for a specific purpose. That is to take away the sins of the world. He came in very humble means, born as a babe, even though he was a king, and laid in a feeding trough in a cave, and not in a palace or anything like that. So people couldn't say, well, he doesn't understand what I'm going through because he doesn't know poverty. Well, even in his ministry, he said, and I'm paraphrasing because this is what he was saying, I'm homeless. He said, I don't have anywhere to lay my head. I don't have a home. And, this is the way he came as a humble servant and to die a sinner's death on a cross. And that's really, the story of Christmas and Easter are inseparable. They're one story. And even though we have time in between them, there's still the reason that he came in the first place, as that on that holy night where Christ was born as the Savior of the world. So with that said, I will not speak with you before Christmas. So I wish you Merry Christmas and pray for those who Christmas is a painful time. And I have to say there are many. We've got people close to us that, Christmas is just a difficult season for them because of the loss of a loved one. And we need to remember those as well. So with that said, a Merry Christmas to you, and I pray you have a blessed time. And you can join us if you so choose online on Sunday. This is Christmas Sunday coming up. And we're going to do a message called Joy to the World. And we want to look at the why questions of that. Why can we have joy? What happened when that child was born? What were the things that were initiated that would later happen in the life of Jesus? And we'll examine some of those. Very appropriate title for Christmas Sunday. So once again, thanks for joining us. And we'll see you here, there, or in the air.